The Nintendo GameCube has been around for 23 years. It's getting old. Parts are starting to break, and those parts are becoming harder to find. So that's why I made this. Now, one of the more common issues I've found in Nintendo GameCubes is a broken lid switch. Basically, the system, when it's booting, will send a signal to itself to ensure that everything's okay. That signal goes through this switch. Signal goes out, it checks to ensure that these two switches are depressed, which closes the circuit, goes through it, goes back to the system, says, hey, I'm ready to rock, and it turns on. The problem comes in when these switches get gummed up with stuff, or if they break entirely. So the lid will close, but these triggers don't actually get depressed, so that way the signal comes in and just hits the switch and stops. It doesn't go past it, and the system thinks that the lid is open. Now, there's a few ways that you can fix this. First and easiest is just to bypass the switch entirely, which would basically mean that the system will always think that the door is closed. You can do this a few ways. First and foremost, and the way I've done it with great success, is to solder a jumper wire from pin 1 to pin 3 of the connector. This completely closes the circuit and tricks the system into thinking that the lid is closed. Another method is just to make one big solder blob connecting all 3 pins of the connector. Now you can also stick a wire or paper clip from this port over to this port, which closes the circuit. And another method is just to cut off this connector entirely, strip the cables, and then wind them together. Now personally, I wouldn't go with this one because if you ever want to change the switch down the road, it's very easy to do so with all the connectors still intact. Doing any of these bypass methods will cause your system to always think that the lid is shut and will always work. Now, I know some of you may be asking, if it's just that easy and cheap to just bypass the switch, why not just do that entirely? Well, that's because of dual disc games. If you're not part of the dual disc generation, let me briefly explain. Some games had so much data that a single disc could not hold it. Once you progress far enough, you'd be asked to stop and insert disc number 2.
Hold it, Snake. Time to change the disc.
So while the system's on, you'd open your lid, swap out the discs, and continue on playing. Without a lid switch, you wouldn't be able to play classic titles such as Enter the Matrix, Lord of the Rings, The Third Age, Halo 7, Tales of Symphonia, Medal of Honor, Rising Sun, Remit King, Metal Gear Solid, Twin Snakes, Freaky Flyers. And that's not all. Resident Evil Code Veronica X, Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 0. And many other titles such as GoldenEye Rogue Agent, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, Battle Nexus, Splinter Cell Chaos Theory, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, Mutant Nightmare, Splinter Cell Double Agent. And of course, how could I not forget my 2 most favorite games on the GameCube, Tiger Woods PGA Tour 2004 and PGA Tour 2005. Method number 2, of course, is just to buy an original replacement. However, we already know that these can break and get gummed up with dirt, and because it's an original part, there was only so many that were made and they're getting used up, which seems to be reflected in the price because those are always going up. Which now leads us to option number 3, the VGR GameCube lid switch. When I started making this, I had a few goals. First was to make a switch that was a direct replacement that you can easily install on your own. Second was to make it reliable so it lasts longer than the original switch. And third was to make it cost effective so it could be bought at a low price and stay at that low price no matter how scarce the original switches get. That way, anybody can repair their GameCube for years and years to come. The lid switch uses a magnetic reed switch rather than a physical switch to stop any breakage and from getting dirty. It works in both the 001 and the 101 models. Installation is very straightforward. You're going to remove the 4 screws underneath using a 4.5mm game bit. You can find these game bits on Amazon, AliExpress, or my website. Once the screws are removed, hold on to both sides of the shell and flip it over. Once it's flipped over, just pull up on the top shell and it will slide off. Push back on the rear plate and that will also come right off. Using a small Phillips head screwdriver, remove the single screw that is holding the switch into place. Remove the switch and then unhook it from the cable by pulling the switch itself away from the cord. This is to prevent that cable from breaking or getting pulled out on the other side. Now get your new switch and plug it into the cable and then place it back into the shell. Once it's seated in, return the original Phillips screw to its spot. Once that's in, we're going to test the switch and the system. Place the included magnet on the edge of the black bar, which is your reed switch. It will stick on its own. With the lid open, return the top of the shell. Place the game inside, close it, and test. If you hear the disc spinning, then the switch is working. If you can't hear it spinning, give it a few seconds to see if it will load your game. If a game loads, then you know the switch and your system are working. Now you can't test this without the top shell on at all. The first way is just a little safer, so don't get a laser in the eye. Once you know it's working, remove the magnet and then return the top of the shell to the system. Again, ensure that the door is open before putting it back. Looking at the rear of the system, close your lid and see where the toggle interferes with the switch. This is to confirm your magnet placement. You want the magnet to be on the edge of the reed switch. Once you know where you're going to put your reed switch, clean the back tab using a cloth, an isopropyl alcohol, or an alcohol swab, whatever you can find. Then remove the film on one side of your adhesive pad and stick it to your predetermined location. Once attached, take off that second film and then stick on your magnet. Now, if I forget to include one of these adhesive pads, or you lose it or damage it, or you end up making one of the boards yourself, more on that a little bit later in this video, there's other ways of attaching it. Stick the magnet on the tape and then adhere it to the front of the tab all the way around to the back of it. Another method is just to use your own double-sided tape that you can find usually at any craft store. And last but not least, you can glue it. However, I don't like this because if you need to go back and reposition it, it's going to be way more of a hassle. Once the magnet's attached, put the top of the shell back on. Again, make sure the lid is open. Then just put in a game and hit the power button. Sorry, put the game in, plug it in first, and then hit the power button. This is our last test to ensure everything's lined up and working before we do our final modifications and seal it up. Once you know it's working, open the lid and then remove the top shell. Take the back plate of the GameCube and cut off these two little prongs. I'm working on a version where you don't have to modify the shell, but the good thing is you won't see this modification from the outside, and it won't affect the system at all, even if you go back to an original Switch. Return the back plate by first feeding in the bottom and then hinging it onto the two clamps on either side. Put the top of the shell back on the system, ensuring that the door is open. I don't know if you guys notice a trend here, but anytime that top lid comes on or off, the door's gotta be open. If you do it with the door closed and you end up wrecking something, don't say I didn't warn you. Anyhow, return those 4 screws and you're done. Test it one more time to make sure that the game boots up and then open the lid to make sure it shuts down. Let's say you've installed it and it's not working. Let's troubleshoot it. Now, I think the biggest issue that people are going to come across is just a magnet misalignment. So as you can see here, the system is on and the magnet is attached, but we don't have any spin. To fix this, you just need to move the magnet to the left or the right side just to ensure that it's not in the middle. Now, I like to recommend that you put something between you and the laser just so you don't accidentally get it in the eye, but for the purpose of demonstration, I did it without. If adjusting the magnet didn't work, we're going to move on to troubleshooting method number 2. Using a metal object like a screwdriver or wire, we're going to bridge the 2 legs of the magnetic switch. Now, what we're trying to figure out here is if it's the switch or if it's the system that is faulty. If you're still not getting disc spin, unplug the switch. Then using metal tweezers or a wire or a paper clip, put it in both ports of the plug. You can also use any of the bypass methods that I mentioned at the start of the video. If you get disc spin by a bypass method, it's the switch. Now, if you end up at this point, please just reach out to me and I'll send you a new switch. But if you want to keep troubleshooting, place the magnet on the edge of the black bar and then test the outside pins for continuity. If you don't get continuity, we're going to test the reed switch next. Put the magnet on and test both legs. If the reed switch itself is good, then check the continuity in the trace. You'll test the 2 furthest points and the 2 closest points from the switch to the magnet. If there's damage to the traces, you could probably run an easy jumper wire, or of course, just reach out to me and I will replace it. Now, I'm really excited to bring this forward, and a lot of people might be looking at this like, why? It's a very simple design. It's not that big of a deal, but it's the first time I really felt like I've contributed to the retro community in some way, been able to kind of like give back and try to help further these retro consoles, or further the life of these retro consoles at least. So if you'd like to get one, they are available on my website. You can get a deconstructed one for a little bit cheaper if you do want to either practice soldering or you're confident soldering. I'm also going to be putting the blueprint for this design up on PCBWay's website, so if you wanted to just print off your own and source the materials, you're more than welcome to. On the topic of PCBWay, they are the sponsor for this video because they were a huge help in making this project come to fruition. I have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to designing PCBs or PCB manufacturers, so when they approached me a few months ago, I had this idea already cooked up and I was like, you guys are the perfect ones to help me with this. So I designed it to the best of my abilities, I sent it off to them, their engineers looked it over, kind of found a few mistakes, more so just in my not the design, but just the technical side of the program, like not connecting certain circuits, etc. They fixed that, they printed off the PCBs, sent them to me. We worked on a few renditions, and here we are with this functioning switch. So please go check them out. There is a link in the description down below if you want to get started with them. I'm also going to link the project, so if you just want to print off this PCB yourself, you're more than welcome to. Now, in the future, I do have a design idea which will require no shell modification, and I'm also going to be playing around with and then posting a video on how to just convert your original switch into a magnetic reed switch. If you'd like to support me in any way, you can always do the easiest thing, which is just like this video and maybe leave a comment below. If you want to support me more, I do have a website with some merch on there, as well as some video game parts, if you're so interested in getting anything like that. But until next time, let's save the consoles.